Thank you for coming back to the Tailgate Podcast. I am Terry Foy, joined once again by Nick Ossello. Nick, we are not live and in person, even though we were together this weekend. How are you feeling there, big guy?
Yeah, hey, honest, hand up, I don't tell a lie. Terry, I'm not feeling that great. I feel like you kind of had a youthful exuberance about you today, and I'm feeling the weight of my age. And after the night we had last night, I'm not sure how you're not feeling as bad
Well,
as
you
I
want to
am.
know what? It's because I knew that I had a secret weapon, which is my next destination. For those of you that see this visually, I don't know if you can make out the Death Star behind me, but that's Allegiant Stadium. So, Nick, yeah, when you've got Vegas in your future, doesn't matter. Saturday night in San Diego can't do anything that Sunday night in Vegas can't handle.
Yeah, nothing like a nice relaxing night in Vegas. So I'm glad that you're there. I'm glad that I put my tail between my legs and crawled back to Dallas. And more power to you. Honestly, sometimes I felt like I was ready to go 12 rounds, and then it was like, Nick, you haven't trained in years. Like this isn't just Apollo Creed all of a
Well,
sudden. And it's good to be
correct.
humbled.
And there were a lot of boxing metaphors when it came to InsideLacrosse.com articles about the crazy action that went on in college lacrosse this week. So let's jump into it and stop wasting time. We'll get to what brought us together at the end of the podcast because it was a truly special day for the National Lacrosse League in San Diego at Snapdragon Stadium. But this is a college lacrosse podcast, and we're going to talk about college lacrosse and save the box for the end. Nick, what are we starting with?
So everybody knows that I want to start with, the team that you hate the most, Notre Dame, who you deserve. You needed to apologize to the Notre Dame fan base. We'll get to that in a second. Versus, honestly, the game that just ended is Duke-Syracuse, and it was a phenomenal game. So I have in one side of my mind heads, one side of my mind tails. Terry, to kick off this review, are we doing heads or tails?
I'm just staring at your bald head, so that's what I've got to say. I got to take it. We're going with heads.
That's the Notre Dame. It didn't matter. It was always going to be Notre Dame. You better believe it. Notre Dame is so sick. They absolutely dominated and ran up the score on Maryland, beating them by 1 in triple overtime. And just like we were talking about Apollo Creed, this was a slugfest for the ages. Chris Kavanaugh has a hat trick. 3 other Notre Dame players notched 2. But ultimately, you knew it. I knew it. Everybody in America knew it. Everybody in the world knew it. It was Pat Kavanaugh. It was, it is, it forever will be the king of clutch. He was the one that notched the game winner in triple overtime. On the Terrapin side, it was Owen Murphy and Eric. I mean, it's Spanos because that rhymes with Thanos, so that's the new way that we're pronouncing that forever. They both had Hatties, and a game that was semi-defined, I feel like, by individual matchups, particularly on Maryland's defense. Zapatello and McCarve kind of had a lot of buzz, objectively had pretty decent games, and it was just a classic slugfest, and I think everything that you wanted to see going into this game. And Terry, do you owe Notre Dame fans an apology?
Tell me why I would. I don't get it.
I don't know. You didn't rank them number 1
Okay.
in a poll.
Yes,
I
I'm
think.
sorry, Notre Dame fans, for having the gall to think that Virginia, a team that actually made the 2022 NCAA tournament, might be a shade better.
Wow.
Nick, you like to talk about matchups, and I think it's the pro lacrosse player in you. But I will concede that in this instance, it does seem to be warranted because after the game, Kevin Corrigan talked about how he felt like Pat Cav got his number taken, I guess is the right way to finish that sentence, with the exception of that last one. And yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think that it's everything that you could have asked for or hoped for between these two teams who have played incredible games since this series has really kind of come to fruition over, I don't know what, the last 7-8 years, something like that. And you're right. I mean, I think, you look at it and you realize like 8 guys got in the box score offensively for each team. That's really heavily distributed for a 13-12 final score game. And there wasn't a single player that ever really took over. What I found to be interesting was we spent a lot of time last week talking about how Eric Dobson, if he sets the tone early because of his dangerous shooting from distance, the things that it can do to defenses, you know, when you take that's in just that kind of concede that is something, and then right next to it, you realize that all off season and even for a good part of the first 5 games here, a lot of the conversation about Maryland has been about their short stick D middies, and then you realize like they didn't pull Eric Dobson. They presented that challenge to Nick Red and Dante Trader and
you don't see their names. We don't say D middies names.
Yeah, you're right. They didn't score, so they assigned that challenge to Nick Purple and Mante Trader, and ultimately I bring it up only because it's like this is the opposite of a game that's hard to analyze because there's not a ton to talk about. There like every single aspect or facet of the game had something to be discussed, and I mean, just you look at it from the standpoint of the face-off X, right? Like this was the game last year because I think they played Georgetown the week prior that you started to get really nervous about Will Lynch. And I was just like, calm down. He's a freshman. He's going to get a lot better as the season went along. And then he did that. And then I think, even though he didn't win 50% against Luke Weirman, he was the best face-off guy in the country or one of the 2 or 3. And that's, a conversation that we'll have probably a little later on the podcast as well. Like that was really interesting in terms of the way in which he went toe-to-toe. He only won 11, but he picked up 9 ground balls. And it definitely felt like he helped Notre Dame, stop runs, kind of built on a couple himself, basically the point is that this is a game that had like a handful of 3 or 4 goal runs in it in the second and third quarters. I'm rambling because again, like you can say something about literally every aspect of this game. It was an incredibly high level game, and because of how dramatic the finish was, it is so far, in my opinion, very clearly the game of the year. And at the end of the season, will certainly be likely a nominee, top 3, top 5 game of the year for sure. Nick, before we move on to anything else about this game, I have to ask, if a player touches down in the crease before the ball crosses the goal line, is it a goal?
Depends. I mean, if it happens to be a Notre Dame guy, honestly, being such
let's just
great
say the
people,
score's 12-11 and there's like 90 seconds left in the game and you're on the road. In that scenario, do you think that it's typically a goal?
Yeah, I think it's a good goal. I think, maybe if some Maryland defensemen weren't playing cheap all game, and now I'll drop that persona to actually give, yeah. Sheesh. What is interesting, last year we kind of hammered home it seemingly every week in season 1 and what an epic season it was for the Tailgate. Just that Maryland can beat you in every facet. They can beat you goaltending, they can beat you defense, offense, transition, they can beat you offensively, they can beat you through their attack, their initiating. And I feel like this was the test that Notre Dame needed to pass, was like the complete team, the complete game, in a game that you needed to mitigate their advantages and take advantages of yours, to stand toe-to-toe with a team that's kind of built to take advantage of every facet of the game. It gives me all the more confidence. And as biased as I am, honestly, the only thing that scares me is a team that is now so imbalanced, and the team that's sitting at the top of the rankings, a team that if they had 100 points to allocate to where they're good at, they use 97 of them on offense, and they certainly have good defensemen. So I love the balance of this Notre Dame team. I'm very, very curious, and I will either say this is the year we win the national championship and jinx it all to shit, or I'll say, listen, we still have some areas that we need to clean up before we are just the best team in history, and that's stopping Virginia's offense is the only thing that I have waiting for us before I say we're in the promised land. And if not, I will.
You're going to become a Maryland fan.
So is that fair?
Yeah.
Ew, dude.
It is fair. One of the things that stands
Maryland
out
fan.
is just how old this Notre Dame team is. Obviously, Chris Kavanaugh is not old, so I'm not trying to make that argument. But when you look at what Jack Simmons provided, Quinn McCann, Brian Tevlin, and obviously Pat Kavanaugh, it's just a very veteran group, guys that know how to win. And when you look at, the guys that were making plays for the Terrapins, Spanos, obviously, redshirt freshman, Braden Erksa, redshirt freshman, either redshirt or a PG true freshman, I can't recall. There's just a bunch of guys who haven't played a ton, and Maryland needs to learn how to win at that end of the field with those guys. But again, like, even as I say that, I'm thinking about is it Daniel Maltz? Yeah. Turning into a Dodger, right? Which we saw a little bit early in the season. So, I mean, just an incredible all around game. I could talk about it all afternoon. I probably don't have time to do that. But, it's the type of game
Yeah.
here. I'll say this, like, so for me, Virginia's going to be number one until they lose. And that wasn't the case last year. I bumped Maryland above them. But that was because Virginia got off to a slow start and they didn't look great. And then I think ultimately that decision got vindicated. That's not the case this year. And it's not to say that Notre Dame in any other season wouldn't be the number one team on the basis of the performances that they put in so far. But ultimately, this thing's going to sort itself out. So whatever. Notre Dame, very clearly the number two team in the country, in my opinion. What's interesting is this. I come away from this loss for Maryland thinking that they're better than I did 3 days ago, even coming off of a win over Princeton, in which, they beat them handily for sure. I felt like the way the game flowed kind of accentuated or emphasized how handily they beat them. But the versatility, the ability to kind of continue fighting through, like, so much about what Maryland put on display, really impressed me and made me even more confident that they're a good team. Now, that learning to win component, it manifests at every stage, right? So, that it could come back and bite them in the quarterfinals, right? I'm not saying that they're a team that's going to go to the Final Four, win the national championship. I still don't think that they're better than Virginia or Notre Dame and possibly even Cornell, but I do think that they're, after seeing that Loyola game, it would have been reasonable to say, how far back did this team actually slide? I don't think that's a realistic concern anymore.
All right. Unfortunately, I think we have to move on. This isn't a Notre Dame podcast. And honestly, what I'll say was a fantastic game, and the one that is at the top of my mind, it ended only a couple hours ago, but Syracuse-Duke. Duke goes into the Dome and gets their first win, which is a wild stat. Their first win in the Dome in program history. I feel like just them being around so long, the history of Duke, Syracuse, it should have happened at some point.
Yeah.
It didn't. Syracuse jumped out to an early lead, and they were doubling up and kind of dominating the first half before pretty much pissing down their leg in the third quarter and allowing Duke to catch up, which set the stage for a pretty incredible fourth quarter. O'Neal had 4, and 4 other Dukies got 2. And in his first time playing attack, Cole Kurse led the Orange with 4, Spalina going 1 and 2. My goodness, was Syracuse's goaltender on absolute fire. I think he ended with 27 saves or something.
Yep.
Just ridiculous. But a back and forth affair that was fantastic, marquee viewing. If you haven't seen it, just go back and watch that fourth quarter. Every single possession mattered. The stakes were high. The execution was high. And I'll say that this was the opposite of the point that we just made in Notre Dame, Maryland. I would say that this was not necessarily matchup-based. I thought the team orientation of Duke's offense was fantastic, the way that they were attacking long approaches. Syracuse's man up is just an absolute thing of beauty because of their ball movement. And it was Charles Balsamic Vinegar with the game-winning goal. Terry, what a game, man. What a game.
Yeah, so I was in the air for a little bit of this, but at the same time, definitely was able to absorb basically what I missed, which was, halftime in the third quarter, once I landed. And first, I just got to start with Charles Balsamo, right? A freshman who has scored overtime game-winning goals on numerous inside lacrosse event stages, Elite Eight being probably the most prominent of them, but a kid that it's interesting. He spent a lot of time, and you saw this after the game. Rob Pennell was tweeting about him. Will Manning was tweeting about him. He spent a lot of time with, high profile attackmen from Long Island in that kind of like training situation. And I guess what I'm getting at is that, like, for a kid who, went to Chaminade and has had the opportunity to be coached by some incredible coaches and players, like, he still plays. He's had a lot of advantages, but he still plays like he has a chip on his shoulder. And it wasn't the game-winning goal that stood out in overtime. It was the 3 ground balls that he picked up in the fourth quarter in overtime to get his team extra possessions that actually had a greater effect on them winning the game than being the guy that actually put the ball in the back of the net and ended it. So, shout out to Charles Balsamo. He's a really impressive player. The fact that he scored right-handed coming down the alley, right, basically wrong-handed, it was, I guess, it's kind of making the same point a second time, but it's just like, he's a grimy, non-conventional player for as skilled and as slick as he is. Like, he just, it's no surprise that he has found a role in that offense when, being a lefty, that you didn't assume that there was going to be a role in an offense with Dyson Williams and Brennan O'Neill on it. But, it's a nice segue into talking about the fact that Duke was able to pull away. And I think it had a lot to do with the fact that Brennan O'Neill had 4 goals and 2 assists. And, for a guy who's averaging between 4 and 5 points, and, every time Duke loses or plays poorly, fans are saying, feed Brennan, feed Brennan, feed Brennan. Why don't you get him the ball more? I felt like, that was the type of performance that they want to see. It didn't seem like they were going out of their way to feed him the ball, but at the same time, there was, he was able to finish in transition. He was able to, pop open off of guys that were hedging off of him, all that sort of stuff. And so, he found a way to facilitate, and he found a way to get his goals. So, at the other end of the field, Syracuse's offense was incredibly efficient when you consider the fact that they won 30% of the faceoffs. And this is the first time that we've seen Gary Gate really go away from Johnny Rachusa in any meaningful way. Jack Fine took 8 faceoffs. So, I don't know what that portends or means going forward. You've heard a lot of grousing about Johnny, and I don't really see it that way. I think he's been good for them, even if, he's below 50%, but he's gone against some really, really high-level faceoff guys. So, I don't think he's the problem, is I guess what I would say. But ultimately, when you kind of make that point, it just all circles back to the fact that, to your point, like, if it weren't for Will Mark, this game would have been really, really one-sided. And, I feel like people don't know that he has another year of eligibility left. So I didn't. I think I was under the impression that he was only going to be there for one season.
Yeah,
but he does.
Breaking news to me.
Breaking news on the Tailgate Podcast. Will Mark will be back for the 2023-24 season. And this was the conversation in the Inside Lacrosse Slack after the game. Is he the first team All-American goalie at this point? And, on a save percentage basis, probably not. But who knows what 27 saves and 14 goals allowed will do to your save percentage. But yeah, another one. I mean, just an awesome Sunday afternoon game. It's the type of game that you lament the fact that it's conference tournament basketball conference tournament weekend, because there's no windows available for lacrosse to get on television. But that's why we all have the internet, and these games are on there, and the broadcast was awesome. So the only issue is that hopefully more people would have seen it if we were on TV, but still, it definitely felt like being on social media during the game. It was one of those games that had everybody's attention, and obviously it delivered. So 2 really, really good ones to kick off this podcast and reflect on a weekend that, definitely delivered when you considered how awesome last weekend was, for sure.
I'm very curious about the Syracuse team. I always feel like, of all the teams that show flashes of brilliance but somehow are inconsistent, like, you hit the nail on the head. If their goalie doesn't have 27 saves, this is as lopsided as it gets.
Yeah.
And then conversely, it seemed like at points their goals they were scoring with ease, and then when they didn't score, they couldn't even get a dot. Like, they looked like it was a JV offense. Like, the threshold for good and bad within Syracuse. Is consistency their problem? Is it structure? Is it anything that they can make an adjustment coaching? I like that they switched it up and gave Kirst a bigger role. And I think that had a much better impact just on the attack unit from an initiating standpoint. But what's your secret sauce to get Syracuse to a more consistent promised land?
Wait till next year. I mean, I don't want to. This is not an "I told you so," but I wrote this. I wrote this in the fall.
That could be it.
I wrote this in the fall. So you hit on the two issues that were going to plague this team all season. They're playing so many young guys that inconsistency on a game-to-game basis, inconsistency on a quarter-to-quarter basis is going to be an issue, right? And we've seen it. Obviously, it cost them against Carolina in the second quarter, and it cost them against Duke in the third. Now, you should take heart if you're a Syracuse fan at their ability to battle back in the fourth because, even though they did play better and they played Carolina even in the second half, and there was a point at which, that game got a little tense when they were down 3, and we talked about, how important that that man down save was. It was losing 15 minutes, right? And just kind of losing the rope for 15 minutes can cost you a game that you can't always get back from. And so it was a sign of growth and progress that they were able to do that against Duke today. But that's one aspect of being young. The other aspect is that this team's going to wear down as the season goes on. Now, obviously, they've already played 2 ACC games. They have Hopkins next week. There is no rest for the weary when it comes to this schedule. They've been fortunate from the standpoint of being pretty healthy. I do think Brandon Avila's, the short stick D-Mitty, his absence has been meaningful in terms of being a veteran, being a good athlete, being important in between the lines. But so those are two things. And then the third thing is and this was another thing that I wrote about when I watched them scrimmage Loyola and High Point. They are a ball movement oriented offense. And that's great because last year they really struggled to move the ball. But what they had last year were Tucker Dordick and Brennan Curry who could get their shots off consistently when they needed or wanted to. Now, the problem was that was all they could do, right? And that was something that they never really graduated past. And so as a result, they finished the year 4-10. This year, they have the opposite problem, which is they don't have a guy that they can just put the ball in his stick and on a physical basis, either speed, power, size, strength, get his look. You're right. Cole Kirst is probably the closest from the standpoint of his size and strength, but he doesn't have it from a speed and quickness standpoint, at least what I've seen so far. And what I talked about in the fall was they've got 3 guys on their third midfield line, all of whom would be the most physically imposing Dodger athletically if they could crack the top 9 offensively, and we haven't seen it. Whether or not we will, I don't know. But that is kind of the short term. So yeah, you're not going to solve the issue of inconsistency. You are solving the issue of inconsistency based on youth. We've already seen progress, right? We talked about that. You're not going to solve the physical fatigue and wear down effect until they get an off season of college strength and conditioning, right? So that's just going to be something that's kind of built into the season, and maybe they can manage it and it'll be fine, but also it's going to be a challenge that they're going to have to figure out. But yeah, it's going to take an infusion of talent, whether through the transfer portal or freshmen coming in order to solve that last problem of offensive initiation. And I do think that they are going to solve it, but not this year.
I think they should just try and get so small and weak that every time they get hit, it looks like a penalty, and then they spend 70% of the game on man up. That's, why would you get big and strong when you're man up so good? Get small and weak and draw 100 penalties when everybody touches you. That's just the genius brain 5D chess.
A modest proposal from you. And not only that, but also a realistic one when you talk about playing in the Carrier Dome, which leads me back to the point that you made about this being the first time that Duke had ever won there. And I picked Duke to win this game. But when they fell behind 5-1, I was kicking myself so hard because when I was talking to other people about the picks, it was like, oh, Duke's so much more talented than them, yada, yada, yada. And my point was Syracuse is going to play them tough because... And John Danowski talked about how hard the trip is to the Carrier Dome from Durham last year after that game. I came away from those comments thinking that he kind of gave his team a permission structure to lose this game, right? Oh, it's a tough trip, so the cards are stacked against us. And last year they dealt with weather and delays, and so it was a different. Well, I say it's different. I don't know that they didn't deal with that this time too. There was terrible weather in parts of the East Coast over the course of the last 2 or 3 days. But all that being said. Yeah, Duke has struggled in this building, and yeah, so they slayed that dragon. They can be excited about it.
Good job, Duke. Hated you in a past life. I think that hate is gone because I like talking shit to my Syracuse friends. So thanks, Duke, for giving me a little extra zhuzh for my chirps to the Orange alum that I unfortunately find myself in the same social circle. Another interesting game, Cornell, Ohio State. And Cornell stays perfect, 4-0. Buckeyes fall to 3-2, and the final score ended up not really representing how the game went. It was 16-13 in favor of Cornell, but they dominated more than that score represents. Cursed, and by the way, it's tough to keep track.
All the cursts.
If your last name's Cursed, you're probably just nasty at lacrosse. Yep. And this was CJ this time leading the charge, and he had 4, and I believe he's tied for the most goals in college lacrosse, maybe tied with the person who has one more game under his belt. So he's a scoring machine, and his quarterback, in a sense, Billy Coyle, had 4. For the Buckeyes, Ed Sheen had 4. Jack Myers was held scoreless, but had 3 apples. I feel like that kind of encapsulates it. It was a good performance from the Cornell defense, and Adler having a big game on Myers. The 13-8 score, I think that happened either in the third or fourth quarter. I think that was more representative than the final score of 16-13. But Cornell, Ohio State.
Yeah, I think it was 9-3 at halftime, and that was kind of, I was kind of splitting my attention between I watched this exclusively in the first half, and then once Maryland Notre Dame started, I was kind of flipping back and forth between the two, and this was a matchup that has come down to Gavin Adler guarding Jack Myers the last few times they've played, and simply put, Gavin Adler's gotten the better of him, and when you consider that Cornell was able to get to 16 against an Ohio State team who held Carolina to 5 goals and, got exploded against by Virginia last week. But, prior to that, there was a lot of excitement and kind of buzz around this defense. To do it without Michael Long is even more impressive. He was going to be the veteran of this offense and the guy who made sure the trains ran on time. CJ Curtis, as you mentioned, it's interesting because for me, the question all along was going to be, with no John Piatelli, how are they going to organize in position, right? And was CJ Curtis going to be more of a behind the goal guy, or was he going to be more of a wing guy? And that was kind of interesting from the standpoint of whether or not Bobby Van Buren was going to guard him, because Van Buren is so comfortable at X and, is comparatively not utilized on the wing. CJ Curtis is very clearly a wing attackman. So, it's a role transition, right? Like, he didn't take on Michael Long's responsibility, at least in terms of geometry and position on the field. Probably has, both from the standpoint of production and, like I said, making sure that everything's organized. But he played well, and Billy Coyle has stepped up. And, everybody who's seen him play dating back to when he was in high school, it's not a surprise. These munchkin attackmen and midfielders that it appears Pete Milliman was so fond of when he was recruiting and developing this offense. He's just another one of them, and they're awesome, right? Like, the change of direction is so hard to cover. Their slickness is so real, and so, just kind of like coming in waves from a pressure standpoint. It's really hard. One of the things that I took away from the broadcast was, and Bear Davis was doing the color commentary, it's clear that Ohio State came in expecting an advantage at the faceoff X. And, they ended up above 50%. Drew Blanchard won 13-24, but Jack Cascadden is no pushover, right? And he finished 10-22. And for future Cornell opponents, I think they're going to have to adjust their expectations in terms of what they're going to be able to get at that position on the basis of his development over the course of this season. I'm not saying that it's going to be at the level that we saw of Will Lynch last year, but it'll be similar in the way that he continues to get better as the year goes on, I think. And so when you compound Ohio State's possession, lack of possession advantage, at least compared to what they expected, their inability to consistently get stops. And then I think that, we've now seen that if you can, and there's like 3 years of evidence of this, if you can take Jack Myers out of the Buckeye offense, they struggle to come up with alternative ideas. And, they probably could have been more aggressive in transition. I think we saw that down the stretch, and obviously they were scrambling trying to come back from a big hole, so that probably led to some of that too. But yeah, they know what they want to do offensively when Myers is humming, and when he's not. Again, I think that Plan B doesn't present itself very easily.
What did you change your thoughts, solidify any thoughts about Ohio State coming into this? Because, started with 3 wins, and then they get kind of dusted by Virginia in a performance in which they only scored 6 goals. And then even though they put up 13 against Cornell, again, as we talked about, having 3 going into halftime, that doesn't represent how poorly, I would argue, that they had. Are you, worried about Ohio State's offense and their lack of production? Like, where do you rank them?
Yeah, so I have them like in the 8, 9, 10 range right now, and I think that it does change the way I had them 4 last week, and that was
I've been described that way, so just
okay.
I'm in the 8, 9, 10 range. So, anyways, go ahead.
So yeah, they. So hard to come back from.
I didn't mean to derail you that much. I don't know if it's lag right now.
No,
Sorry
it's not. This is the internet working exactly the way it's supposed to. No, I guess what I didn't know after the Ohio State Virginia game is Virginia awesome, right? And I think we still don't know that, right? What they did to Richmond over this past weekend just reinforces, how awesome they are and the hotness. The heat, I guess, is the better way of saying it, of their start. So, I think what this shows is that, it's another good team that they failed to keep pace with. And so as a result, they're a level below. How far and, what they do when they go back to the drawing board and play with a little bit more desperation, play with their hair on fire. I mean, I don't think we're going to spend very much time on Georgetown versus Princeton, but at the same time, like, that is like the definition of a hungry dog runs faster game. And it comes from every angle, right? Like coaching staff incentivized to make personnel moves, players seeing those personnel moves get made, the guys who keep their role but see like one of their teammates' roles diminished, they play harder because they know that it might be them next. In terms of the quality of practice over the course of the week, like, if you're the 7th attackman and you see the 5th attackman just got bumped into a starting role, like how much harder are you going to play? Because now if you're the 5th attackman in 2 weeks and we play poorly again, it might be you that gets the starting opportunity. So, I think that when you play poorly in successive weeks and when you're not getting the results that you want or need, things change very, very quickly. And Ohio State's in that position now. Princeton's in that position now. So what we see from these teams that we know are talented going forward, I mean, expect them to play better. It's kind of the shortest thing that I would say. But what it actually looks like, I don't know.
Well, it's always fascinating on the spectrum of letting players know, like, hey man, you're our guy and you're gonna be in the lineup consistently, giving them the confidence to make the mistakes versus the, hey, you've played a couple bad games. How do I let this player know that his position is on the chopping block if he plays poorly, and how does that affect his confidence? And then, in kind of becomes that snowball effect. So an interesting coach management problem, I would say, and certainly something to keep an eye on if they take a step back, be like, listen, just pull the trig and get new guys in there who are hungry and ready to prove themselves. So, but, let's not forget, I love seeing Ohio State lose. So, and I like music. I wanted to come up with a clever nickname for this next game, and I just didn't. I just can't. I'm not clever. I'm not witty. But Penn State Penn. What a comeback season so far for the Nittany Lions. In a battle of brotherly love. Penn State's legit getting good. Second win in a row.
That's the nickname. Battle of Brotherly Love. That's perfect.
Yeah, but that's... Yeah, but lame? I don't like that. I wanted to
it wasn't clever enough for you.
That's too good of a nickname.
Got it. That's what you would actually put on a
my standards are high. I'm in the 8, 9, 10 range.
Exactly.
Yeah. But final score being 15-9, Penn State's second win against a legitimate Ivy League opponent after they beat Yale last week. Penn State's D kept everyone in check, and I feel like it was a great bookend performance. They prevented Penn from scoring for a large sum of time in the beginning and a large sum of time in the end. Never really gave Penn a chance to let themselves trick themselves into thinking that they were going to win. What a disgusting word salad that was. Kevin Winkoff had 5. And honestly, a good performance from almost everybody around. For Penn, it was, kind of bare bones. Shipley had a hat trick. Hanley had 1, but couldn't really get any consistent opportunities. And for Penn State to go from 3-11 last year to now 2 big wins in a row, really kind of cool to see, and good for them putting the happy back in Happy Valley. I just struggled through that. Terry, please take over.
That was well done. Happy back in Happy Valley is something that I think we can sink our teeth into. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it felt like Penn was. They heard me say for the last week they only play close games, and they were just like, all right, hold my beer. Like, no, that's not true. Because you're right. The Nittany Lions just put it on them, start to finish, and this is a completely different team from who they were last year, both in terms of guys returning from injury. And in terms of new additions, Winkoff being one, a Binghamton grad transfer. Chris Jordan is a grad transfer from St. Lawrence, who didn't have a huge one in this game, but has played well in prior games. Matt Costin was somebody that I know a couple of prominent Penn State alum were waiting for him to contribute, to step up in this way. They got 2 pole goals from Jack Posey, and then from a defensive standpoint, when I see Dylan Gergar being held 0 for 9 shooting. That one stands out to me. He had 3-1 last week, but still feels like he hasn't necessarily fully hit his stride. And that's where when the Shane Hanley thing is cooking, then it's what opens. Or I'm sorry, Gergar Hanley thing is cooking. That's what ideally opens up opportunities for everybody else. But when James Shipley is scoring 3 goals, you kind of assume that they're running in transition, and it suggests that maybe Penn State's settled defense was really, really strong. So yeah, a lot of positivity that you can take away from this one if you're a Penn State fan. They're just better, right? Like, and how much better again? Like, kind of TBD. One note, looking at the box score of this one, Chase Mullins took every faceoff. So they've been rotating Hudson Bone and Chase Mullins pretty regular or pretty evenly prior. So that's something to watch going forward. But yeah, I mean, Penn's 1-2. They have a win over Georgetown that got a little bit better by virtue of the Hoyas' win over Princeton. Now they have lost to Duke, a loss to Penn State, and they travel to St. Joe's at midweek. The Hawks are coming off of their first loss of the season to Hopkins, and then they host Villanova next weekend. So, the point with Penn, as ever, is they're always playing good teams. Those are 2 more top 20 matchups in the next 6 days. They've got an opportunity to get back on the horse. They could be 3-2, when we're talking about them next week. And if they are, going into Princeton and getting the Ivy League season started, we're going to feel a lot differently about them than we do right now. But clearly, getting Dylan Gergar going, getting Sam Hanley going is kind of key to getting back to who they were last year.
Where are you putting Penn State on the rankings meter? Their only loss came to Villanova, who's actually, their win over Delaware was surprising, and their only, Villanova's only loss being to Yale, has them as a decent team, certainly not bad by any means, and that's the only team that's beat Penn State. So given their 4 wins, given the loss to Villanova, maybe not looking as bad with Villanova getting some wins, where's that ranking?
Yeah, so I have those 3 teams right next to each other, 12, 13, 14. So Yale, I had 16 last week. They jump up to 12 by virtue of their win over UMass. Penn State jumps up to 13, and Villanova goes from 17 to 14. I would say that it's kind of tough, right? Because you talk about, all right, well, they have losses within that 3-team group. So then who's got the best win? And it's like, well, the best win is over one of the teams in that group, I think, right? I think Yale's probably the best team of any win that Villanova, Penn State, and Yale have. So does that mean I rank Penn State over Yale? Because they have the best win and it's over Yale, or does that mean I rank Yale over Penn State because I think Yale's the best team? So still trying to figure that one out, but that 12, 13, 14 range is where I've got those. Not a range you're familiar with, Nick.
No, that's too good. All right. Well, I'm weirdly torn. I wanted to make a joke where you said Penn said, "Hold my beer." I wanted you to say Penn said, "Hold my barrel-aged single malt Scotch," because Penn State would say, "Hold my beer."
Correct.
Penn, the Ivy League, hold my something.
Some very
1930s aged Pinot Noir.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good one. Get chirped, Penn.
I really set you up there. Knock that one
next
out.
Next game was, yeah. I'm at about 35% brain capacity right now, and
for the listeners at home,
anyways,
that's 15% down from his normal 50% brain capacity.
You know what? You say stuff like that when we're not face to face. It's everybody's the tough guy over the internet. But last night you were, being like, "Wow, Nick, you're so handsome and strong and smart."
I did say that you were fast back in the day, but now you're slow. That was a real compliment that I gave you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that I used to be fast. Hopkins St. Joe was,
crazy.
Notre Dame Maryland was one of the games of the year. This has to be included because Hopkins came away with a much-needed win, previously unbeaten St. Joe. None of the setup matters because this fourth quarter was on drugs. It was on performance-enhancing drugs.
As opposed to hallucinogens.
Entering the fourth quarter, it was a 12-7 lead, and it just became the pig shit wrestle-off. And 6 goals were scored in 78 seconds. The game-winning play was an over-the-head check from short stick Midi, name omitted is his name, I think. It was just such a beautiful, "Oh, honey, let me go grab a beer from the fridge," and then you come back and you're like, "Oh, yeah, you just missed 5 goals," and every single crazy interaction, every single beautiful mess that could happen in lacrosse was represented in the fourth quarter of this game. Again, ultimately Penn pulled it off, but
Hopkins. Carter
Page had 4 and a big performance from Colin Reich, who had a goal. Hopkins pulled it off. So I'm so fired up to watch that fourth quarter. I watched about half of it and I was like, damn, I need to be in a better state of mind and really soak it in. Terry, give me a little bit on Hopkins St. Joe on the surprise matchup of the year.
Yeah, so I think it's hard not to start from the place of Hopkins is healthy, and they had been very unhealthy prior to this game. So, they had gotten Jacob Angelis and Russell Melendez are their 2 best attackmen, in my opinion, and both those guys missed the loss to Loyola, and the offense looked impotent, for lack of a better way of putting it. But, on top of that, Bowden Zolik is back. Timmy Marcille, their goalie, who had been playing at, arguably a first-team All-American level early on, against Jacksonville and Georgetown and Carolina, got hurt against Loyola. He's back. So this is the team, right? This is what they should be. And it's not just those guys. There are other guys who had missed time as well. So, I think that this was, to your point, this was a game that was very different. It was in terms of, you watched the first half, it felt like, it was a relatively slow pace. It felt like Hopkins was going to be able to control the game, particularly because they had a really good plan for Zach Cole at the faceoff X, and Tyler Dunn won 18-32. Logan Callahan came in, took one faceoff, didn't win it, but yeah, Tyler Dunn was awesome. And they talked about it on the broadcast, right? Zach Cole's overall quality gets called into question sometimes because of the strength of schedule that St. Joe's plays, and for me, that's always, at the face-off position specifically, overblown or to be tossed aside. We've seen enough guys come from, mid and low major conferences go on, D2, D3, face-off guys go on to do great things at the pros that, we know that this position is pretty independent, and it should be judged not by the strength schedule of your team, right? But the strength schedule of the opposing face-off guy. And so, point is, I'm not ready to give up on Zach Gold, but I do think that this was a matchup that obviously Hopkins had an advantage of. And so, as a result of the fact that they weren't basically playing up a 90-degree grade by virtue of the strength of the opponent and how many possessions they were getting, they're really able to dictate things. And I thought that St. Joe's really clearly wanted to start and initiate the offense from the midfield, particularly early. And, I thought Scott Smith and some of the other guys that got switched on to Levi Anderson did a really nice job of kind of limiting. You talked about Carter Page. I mean, his step-down shooting from up top, paired with Tucker Brown is really, that's where they kind of hum. And it got going late, but I thought Hopkins did a really nice job of not just limiting Anderson, but also taking Matt Bomer out of the game too. So, I think that this was a better performance defensively than at least for, 30 to 45 minutes than the 14 goals allowed suggests, and then at the other end of the field, I mean, 6 assists from Jacob Angelos, you can understand when he's the distributor and when he's the guy getting everybody else touches, and then Melendez, who didn't end up producing anything, but had a couple opportunities, and ultimately, he's their dodger, he's their end of shot clock guy. It was I'm kind of rambling at this point, but basically what I saw was a game that had kind of one half or one tone for the first 30 to 45 minutes, and it was Hopkins very effectively managing things and seeing how much better they are with their full personnel, and then St. Joe's kind of creating a chaotic environment that they were able to thrive in down the stretch. And to your point, Hopkins obviously was able to match it, but at the same time, another stiff test for them and a good win, and a stiff test among stiff tests. I mean, the fact that as we said, St. Joe's turns around and plays Penn on Tuesday, and Hopkins plays Virginia on Tuesday, and then the Blue Jays have to go to the Dome. It's pretty remarkable what some of these coaches of top 20 teams put in front of their players, and what we're going to see here coming down the pipeline.
Does it almost do a disservice to a game like Hopkins St. Joe that's so beautifully chaotic? Does it do a disservice to provide legitimate analysis?
Yeah, it does.
Because how do you analyze?
It's beautiful chaos.
Oh my goodness! Yeah. Look at this, just absolute let's analyze, a car wreck. Well, no, let's just sit back and watch it and be like, thank God that didn't hit me.
You could have used Demolition Derby. I mean, is a car wreck. Like, nobody wants analysis of a car wreck, but I guess nobody wants an analysis of Demolition Derby, so never mind. I guess it's the same thing.
Yeah. Maybe, yeah. Well, I was literally picturing I was picturing a monster truck rally.
Yeah, exactly.
And a car wreck came out of my mouth. But you know what? Maybe that's what we get into. Oh, Terry and Nick analyzing monster truck rallies, and there goes Gravedigger sliding high and late. But God, yeah, I'm gonna go find and watch that. Maybe instead of morning coffee, just throw on that fourth quarter of Hopkins show. And my goodness, in a lovely change of pace, if you're looking to go to bed, Denver UNC, from the thrill of that St. Joe game to let's put it on ice, Denver came back and won 9-8. DU let UNC come back. They were up 6-3, and it was one of those games where it was like 1-1, and then it was 2-2, and then it was 3-3, and then it was 4-4. So there was a little bit of a lead with 6-3, and then that disappeared, and it was the ultimate battle. UNC's Goldsmith had 4 goals, and DU had a nice little balance. Josh Carlson and Kelly each had 2, but ultimately it was JJ Silstrop who netted the game winner. I'm really struggling to figure out if either of these teams is good or if either of these teams is bad. I remember UNC's game against Ohio State, which was a snooze fest as well. I think that final score was like 8-5 or something. And then UNC beat Syracuse 19-13. So in a game where both offenses and both teams have shown the ability to, at least have a little bit of firepower, the end result was one of the more surprising ones all
Yeah,
weekend.
exactly. And that was why I wanted to talk about it because, I think that had Carolina taken big care of business in this one, it I don't want to say it would have been night-night for the Pioneers, but it would have been essentially Big East time, right? We talked about this last week with Georgetown. The losses to Air Force and Duke, created a tone, so to speak. But this is a bounce back win, and it doesn't get any easier. Once again, kind of theme of the podcast, right? Denver heads to Yale next Saturday, but at the same time, to your point, the balance. It's not just this game; it's been the season all along. Noah Manning, 13 points. J.J. Silstrop, 12 points. Richie Connell, 11 points. Michael Lampert, 10 points. Stephen Avery, 8 points. Mick Kelly, 6 points. So you go up and down the depth chart, and that hierarchy, that democracy, it was going to be what they had to be, right? Like, in my estimation, they're a not quite as good Syracuse offensively in the sense that they rely on sharing the ball and making sure that, the ball movement gets the looks for this team. It's not, the inconsistency comes not just from youth, which we already talked about, but the fact that some days you just don't, you, if you're bigger, stronger, fast and powerful, whatever, like when you're tired or when you're not as focused or when you're not as motivated, actually that's not true. When you're not as motivated, you can see it. But when when you're a little bit tired or just a little bit not as focused, like your speed, strength, size, like it's still there, right? You can still reach into that well and pull it out. But when you're struggling a little bit and you have to move the ball, like it's just going to hit off the top of your stick and go out of bounds a disproportionate number of times, an unpredictable amount of times, and your game is going to, kind of it's going to be squandered as a result. So that's the position that they're in, right? Like that's the team that they have to fight against on a week to week basis. And for Carolina, you have to allow for bad performances because it's sports. But on the other hand, this was a veteran team who had gotten humbled against Ohio State and rebounded well against Syracuse. Now you're at home, like you just can't have this if you want to be a team that's going to be serious contender to win an NCAA tournament game. So the likely answer is that all of these teams are bubble teams at best. And when I say all of them, I'm talking about Syracuse, Carolina, Denver, and maybe even some of the other teams that have started to struggle a little bit, like Princeton and Penn, and some of the other teams that we've talked about already on this podcast. But all that being said, congrats to the Pioneers. Congrats to Bill Tierney. And I was thinking about this. When do you think you're going to be able to get Jeff Teat to wish his former coach Bill Tierney a happy retirement?
It might take a little finagling. I think a lot of that's going to fall on the personal favor list. But Jeff Teat and Bill Tierney, I heard they had a rocky relationship. So
I mean, that coach-player dynamic, it's tough. It changes dramatically once you graduate, though, as I'm sure that you can attest. So maybe,
they never really established a good coach-player relationship. Oh God, I feel like the entire theme of this season so far has been how do you rank teams, and rankings are so fun because it allows you to kind of take a step back and play this team beat this team, but also lost to that team who beat this team. And I feel like this season has been particularly a bit of a gong show when it comes to happen. So for kind of the last time at least on this episode, Denver and UNC, where do you rank both of those teams?
I mean, right now I think UNC is probably 17th. And I don't think Denver's a top 20 team still. I mean, that Air Force loss is really tough, but the win over Carolina is obviously pretty valuable, and the loss to Duke isn't that big of a deal. It's pretty easy to kind of stifle away. So, I mean, they're right there. I could easily slot them in at 19 or 20. So I'm not done yet. But in terms of this initial draft, I don't have room for the Pioneers.
Ooh, that just makes me smile. running through any other games for the weekend. Michigan beating Delaware. Delaware takes another step backwards. Ever since Brown had that bad loss, they looked pretty good.
Well, we got to
against
talk about
Stony
Brown
Brook.
for a second because they were playing without 5 seniors who I'm told are going to be suspended for 6 games. Originally suspended for 7 and had a knockdown by a game on appeal. There are still 5 more games for them to go. But it's big names. Devin McClain, Logan Paff, Griffin King, Trevor Yerbo, Cody, and Oscar Hertz. So, I'm doing a little bit more reporting on it, and there'll probably be something on InsideLacrosse.com this week. But, certainly a substantial news item for the Bears.
Yeah, and, again, Larkin Kemp, maybe give us some inside scoops there. The only other game that really stood out was Georgetown finally getting the monkey off their back and getting the first win of the season against Princeton. Princeton's an interesting team because they beat Monmouth and Manhattan, which doesn't prove much. No offense to either one of those programs.
Well, they're an interesting team because they made it to the Final Four last year and
pretty
brought back
bad
a
to
ton of
Maryland.
talent. So that's why they're an interesting team. So, yeah.
But then they lose
Correct.
to Georgetown. What
Correct.
the heck?
Yeah, it's crazy. Sports, man. That's why we're into this whole thing.
Yeah. Sports. That's why we are. And speaking of that, as we round out this episode, let's do a good guy of the week segment.
I hope you have one.
Heartwarming. Let's tug at those heartstrings. I do have one.
Yes.
Do you have one?
I was gonna stretch really far.
You don't have one?
Not one that fits the criteria of what we previously talked about.
Wow. I mean, honestly, just guys that see the positives in life, guys like me, that's who you want to be around. You aware of the Ryan Scoble story? It's a good story. I really like kind of seeing some guys go through adversity with a smile on their face and having the support of the team. He is what year is he? I think he's a junior at Mercyhurst, and he had to get a heart transplant. And, obviously that, he found out about it when his on-field performance was being impacted. Life was getting a little weird for him, and then he got some bad news, had to go through a heart transplant, and now he's back on the field playing, which you just love to see. There's a great article that I think Dan Arestia worked on that details a lot of the toughness that he faced, a lot of hurdles that he had to overcome, and yet another story on sports are bigger than sports, because to go through something like that and not have your teammates or not have a team in general would make it infinitely more tougher. So just wanted to give Ryan Scoble a shout out. Thank you for handling adversity well. And I'll even take yours, Terry. I'll do the double dip. I have a good friend, a good social media friend who's not actually my friend. I've never met him. I think he's actually the director of communications for the Fiesta Bowl, which I played in, which is originally how we got in touch. But his son plays lacrosse out in Arizona. And Pat Harbison lives out in Arizona, former teammate of mine, greasy scumbag D. Mitty. I used to hate him, now I love him. And just like a little bit of a feel-good story, but Harvey wore 40 in tribute to Brendan Looney, and now Scott's son Matthew plays in honor of he originally wore 40 because of Pat Harbison, but Pat Harbison made the time to take him aside and say, hey, listen, here's why I wear 40. You don't wear it for me. You wear it for the story of Brendan Looney. And now they're doing some really cool fundraising opportunities for the Brendan Looney Foundation. Awesome. So just kind of one of those really cool small worlds. He listened to the episode and said, hey, as far as good guys of the weeks go, it might not be, time relevant, but Harbison's been doing some awesome stuff and raising awareness about Brendan Looney and his story in Arizona, and Brendan Looney's ultimate sacrifice still having an impact all across the country. That's incredible. So between overcoming adversity, between raising awareness for Brendan Looney, I feel like there's always some good to be found in Good Guy of the Week.
If you are unfamiliar with Brendan Looney's story, Matt Kinnear wrote a tremendous account of kind of both the actual situation as well as the legacy of his death. On I believe that the 10-year anniversary of his death, so published just a few years ago. So worth a quick Google search, and you'll be able to find that. So my good guy of the week is a nice segue.
I actually haven't read that. I'm gonna have to go.
There you go.
Read that.
And after you described the Scoble story, it did ring a bell. So shout out to him for getting back on the field. Tremendous commitment, tremendous sacrifice, tremendous will. It's incredible for sure. I want to shout out Cam Holding because I ran into him this morning, and he plays for the San Diego Seals, but he also, relative to most of his teammates, if not all of them, was probably more concerned or preoccupied with the performance of the boards in an outdoor lacrosse game, because it was his job, among others, to make sure that temporary setup worked. So the amount of, I just can't imagine playing in a game and literally like being the guy who is most worried about like the basket falling down in a basketball game because it was your job to make sure that the basket didn't fall down. Like, that's crazy to me. So, he, Steve Govett, the rest of the SEAL staff that conceived of and executed the outdoor game, tremendous tip of the cap. And I hope you guys got a good night rest on Saturday night after, putting on a lot of hours and a lot of worry in terms of bringing it to reality. More than 8,000 fans in attendance, and certainly a landmark moment both for the league and for lacrosse in Southern California. So I listened to the first quarter of the call. I would give you like a 3 out of 10 so far. But you looked great in front of the step and repeat, and it was great hanging out with you in San Diego. Kudos to you and Cooper for bringing the event to I don't know, what would you say, a vibrant state that you could feel through your ears?
I wouldn't say that, and it's funny enough, I'm still so early in this broadcasting that I'm going to be like, damn, is it a 3 out of 10? And I'm like, I know he was joking, but was he really? So I'll tee you up to say something nice about me. Would you give my broadcast performance or my friendship performance, a better nod for this past
That's a good question. Based on the...
Or you can really put the nail in the coffin right now.
I'm gonna give your friendship the nod, because like I said, I've only experienced 25% of your broadcasting from the weekend. But we went out to dinner twice, and you included me. You got back to my texts asking what you were doing both times. So that's just great friendship right there.
Hey, everything okay? Like, is that the bar for Terry Ploy's friendship? Is
just responding when I'm saying like, "Hey, what are you doing?"
You were a great friend. You responded. You didn't block my phone number. No, it was a big step forward in you and I's friendship. For God, I hate that I'm saying positive and nice stuff about you now. This sucks. It is very fun to watch a guy like you who knows so much and has so much information, but you don't just like regurgitate facts. You use the information that you have about like the sport of lacrosse to have really cool, very informed, original opinions. And my least favorite thing to do sometimes is just sit back and listen, but sitting back to you and Cooper and just soaking in some of the information that you guys were bouncing back and forth off each other, that's not my game. I'm not the information, fun, original idea guy. I'm the everybody's going to be having a good time guy. So to sit back and listen to you two bounce ideas and talk about the state of the sport and talk about the outdoor game and everything was fantastic. Thank you for it, and that's as good as an episode end as I can.
Everybody, if you like what you heard, leave a rating and review. Tell a friend to tell us about next week's good guy. Nick, I won't see you in the next 7 days, but have a great one. Stay away from the suds, and we'll talk next week. Love you more.
Love you.